Welcome back. I hope that you enjoyed transposing your repertoire into different keys, and that some of you even experimented with playing in keys that we didn't even try together last time. The thing that you'll find in music is that we will keep circling back to the core concepts that we are learning in this course. But each time we revisit the concepts, we'll dig a little deeper and learn even more about each piece of the musical puzzle. Some weeks we'll revisit repertoire, but add more complex musical details. In other lessons, we'll expound upon a familiar concept in ways that will open up a whole new musical world, often through new repertoire. I think that today's lesson will make your musical life richer, as we'll be building upon the way we play chords and harmonies. Before we get to that, though, I'd like to begin by reviewing several of the pieces that you've been working on since our last lesson, so that you can assess your progress. You'll be able to pick up the new skills more easily if you've achieved mastery with the material that we covered previously. So let's begin by reviewing Ode to Joy, but in our transposed key of F major. We'll take the repeat sign at the end today. 1, 2, and play. Next, let's play the Woodland Jaunt in the key of F major. We'll do version 2 with the left hand chords. 1, 2, 3, play. Now, let's play the Kohler Melody Opus 218, number 18, that we worked on perfecting at our last lesson. Your hands are in the G major, 5-finger pattern. 1, 2, 3, play. How about if we try a new transposition today? I'd like to try the Kohler melody that we just played in the key of D major. First, let's quickly play our D major 5-finger pattern and chords. 1, 2, 3, 4. We could play the chord progression, but we don't really need it for this example. So let's just dive into playing the piece in D, now that we remember which notes we need for the new key. In this piece, the right-hand melody begins on the 3rd scale degree. So which note will that be? Hopefully you identified it as an F sharp. In this key, I like to keep my 3rd fingers resting gently on F sharp so that I'm not tempted to play the F natural. I'd like you to play the right-hand melody with me. Remember to think about the intervals as you reference the score. As we play, I'll talk you through the intervals. We'll go slow the first time since we have seconds, thirds, and a couple of fifths in this one. Let's start with our right hand a little higher this time. So the first note is treble F sharp. 1, 2, 3, 4. Up by step, down a fifth. Up by step, down a step. Down a third, up a step, down a fifth, down a step, down a third, repeat. Shall we try that again? Try to prevent any mistakes that you made last time. 1, 2, right hand. Now, let's try the left hand. We'll play the bottom 2 notes of our tonic or D major chord in measure 1. In measure 2, we play the top 2 notes of the tonic chord. And then we have the interval of a second under the 4th and 5th scale degrees in measure 3. Here we go with the left hand. 1, 2, and play. 2, 3, 4. 2, 3, 4. 2, 3, 4. Up a step. Here's your third. 2, 3, 4. 2, 3, 4. Second. 2, 3, 4. Up a third, down a third. Are you ready to try it hands together? If not, just play the hand that needs more work right now while I play both hands. 1, 2, and play. Let's do that one more time. If you made mistakes, it can be challenging to fix everything at once. So choose 1 or 2 mistakes that you will try to prevent this time. 1, 2, and play. Please work on this transposition on your own before our next meeting. If you find that you are successful and you'd like to challenge yourself, feel free to try it in one of the other keys that you know. For example, you could play this in E major or even B major if you'd like a real challenge. Just be sure to remember the accidentals, either the sharps or the flats that occur in the key. If you warm up with the new scale and chords, you'll be more likely to remember these accidentals. I want to take a moment to follow up on key signatures, which I introduced briefly during our last session. Simply put, a key signature indicates the sharps or flats in any given key. It is found immediately following the treble or bass clef, and the order of the sharps and flats in the key signature is always the same. This way, you don't have to read individual accidentals. Eventually, you will see 2 sharps at the beginning and know which pitches are sharp throughout the piece. Because we'll memorize these and reinforce them once we learn the full major scales, you'll know the name of the key as soon as you see the key signature, which will help you to identify the tonic and other harmonies anticipated in the piece. For now, let's memorize the key signatures for 4 keys. C major has no sharps or flats. G major, which we looked at last time, has 1 sharp, F sharp. It is found on the top line in the treble clef and on the landmark F line in the bass clef. So when you see 1 sharp in the key signature immediately following the clefs, you know 2 things. First, that all of the Fs in the piece are sharp, and second, the key of the piece is in G major. Eventually, we'll learn the corresponding minor keys too, but for now I'd like you to focus on the major keys. D major has two sharps in the key signature, F sharp and C sharp. The F sharp always comes first in the key signature, and the C sharp follows in the space a fourth below. Finally, F major has one flat, B flat, found on the middle line in the treble clef and the second line from the bottom of the bass clef staff. Next, I'd like us to play the 12-bar progression that we learned last time. Remember to keep your left hand and wrist loose as you play these repeated chords. And you'll notice from the key signature that this is in the key of G major. Get your hand set up over the low G major chord. 1, 2, and play. Move to C. Back to G. Typically, in music, we have 4-bar phrases. So you can expect a cadence every 4 measures. This chord progression has 3 4-bar phrases, and it is one of the typical blues progressions. Because there are 12 bars, we call this the 12-bar blues. I came up with a melody that might work well on top of this progression. But before we try the melody, I'd like to introduce the blues scale. We've been doing a lot of major scales since the beginning of our course, so I thought it would be good to try out a new scale to expose your ears and fingers to alternate sounds. In its most basic form, the blues scale consists of 5 notes, but they are different from the major 5-finger scale. I'll relate the blues scale notes to the pitches of the major finger pattern so you can relate them to something you already know. We have scale degree 1, a lowered 3rd scale degree, the 4th, the lowered 5th scale degree, and the regular 5th scale degree. So, in the key of G, we'll have a G, B flat, the lowered 3rd, C, D flat for the lowered 5th, and D natural for the regular 5th scale degree. It sounds like this. You'll notice that the top 3 fingers of your hand are only separated by half steps. That is to say, there are no keys in between. Although the top part of your right hand is a little more closed, remember to stay relaxed to ensure that you don't tense up. Will you try playing that pattern with me? We'll go up and then down. 1, 2, here we go. G, B flat, C, D flat, D. Now, based on that blues scale and the left hand 12-bar pattern that you learned at the last lesson, I've come up with our first 12-bar blues. I'm going to let you work on this melody on your own before the next lesson, but I'll play it for you right now so you can hear how it will sound. I'll play both hands, but you may want to focus on listening to the melody this time. As you've no doubt noticed, when we've been playing chords or triads, the left hand has had to jump around quite a bit. First, let me say that I'm glad you are gaining confidence moving your hands around the piano keyboard. The reality is that in piano music, we rarely stay in one location, so it's a good skill to learn. Second, as I mentioned when we first learned about the primary chords, learning them this way, where they are stacked up in thirds, helps you to get a feel for each chord under your hands and fingers, and it helps you to learn the names of the notes or pitches in each chord. Also, when we name the chord, using either a letter name or the Roman numeral, we have to stack the chords in thirds in order to identify the root of the chord, which tells us the chord's name or which scale degree it's built upon. Today, we are going to learn about some alternate ways to play these chords. Ultimately, these new ways of playing the chords will be easier and they will sound better in chord progressions. Before we can do that, I'd like to show you how we can alter the way we stack up the notes on the staff for each of these chords to put them in a different position. We call these different positions inversions in music. So let's take the G major chord. This looks familiar and it is stacked in thirds. When you see it like this on the staff, we know that the name of the chord is the bottom note, in this case G. And we say that it is in root position because the root, or the name of the chord, is on the bottom. Now, if I take the bottom G and move it up an octave, I end up with a chord that looks a little different. This is called a first inversion chord. From bottom to top, this chord is spelled B, D, G. So it's still a G chord, but now the G is on the top. This is called a first inversion G major chord. If I were using chord symbols above a melody, as in a lead line, I would label this chord G/B. It's still a G chord because when I rearrange the notes of the chord to stack them up in thirds, G will be on the bottom as the root note. Thus, G is the name of the chord. The pitch named after the slash symbol is the lowest sounding note, so it's a G/B. If we are using Roman numerals to identify this chord, we have a slightly different nomenclature to identify a first inversion chord. Let's assume that we are in the key of G. So this would be the tonic chord, or Roman numeral 1. The interval between the bottom note and the top note is a little larger than a fifth. Let's count up from B to G. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It's a sixth. The interval between the bottom note and the middle note is a third. We could say that this is a 1-6-3 chord, but since thirds form the foundation of how we build our chords, it doesn't add any special information here, so we omit the 3 from the numbers for the first inversion chords and simply say that this is a 1-6 chord. So, a 1-6 is another way of saying that this is a first inversion tonic chord. When we use the Roman numerals and the numbers, or figures as musicians call them, below the staff, it's called a figured bass. In earlier periods of music, the keyboard part in chamber music was not written out. Rather, they'd have a right-hand melody and a figured bass written in. The keyboardist would play or improvise the keyboard part during performance based on the figured bass. Musicians call this skill realizing the bass line. It's a skill that is rarely taught in beginning piano lessons in the 21st century. As a result, when pianists get to college, many find it difficult to realize figured bass on the spot. But I want you to understand the concept. Now, we can then take the bottom note of the first inversion chord and move it up 1 octave. When we do that, it's still a G major chord because we only have G's, B's, and D's, but now the D is on the bottom. So the spelling from bottom to top is D, G, B. This is a second inversion chord, or a G/D chord. It's a G chord and D is on the bottom. To discover the figured bass numbers, we just have to figure out the intervals between the bottom and the other notes of the chord. First, between the bottom and the top note, we have a sixth again. We put the 6 in the figured bass as a superscript number. Between the bottom note and the middle note of the chord, we have the interval of a fourth. The 4 for this figured bass goes directly below the sixth, but we do not use a slash when using Roman numerals, so it should not look like a fraction. Thus, we call the second inversion chord a 1-6-4 chord. Whenever you see a 6-4 after a Roman numeral, you know it's a second inversion chord. Because we can see these chords so frequently in music, pianists practice playing these as part of our warm-up routine, and we have standardized fingering that we use for each inversion, which helps us to improve accuracy during performance. However, I must warn you that the fingering for the inversions is different for each hand. So when you first try playing these hands together, you may encounter some coordination issues. So let's look at the left hand fingering first, and then we'll practice the chord or triad and inversion as we'll play it in our future warm-ups. You already know the fingering for the root position chord. When you move up for the first inversion, you play finger 5, 3, 1. Just expand your thumb or the top part of your hand slightly to accommodate the interval of a sixth between the bottom and top notes. Then, when we go up to the second inversion, the finger for the middle note of the chord changes to 2. So you'll play 5, 2, 1, since it's better to have the 2 and 1 playing the third at the top of this chord with the left hand. Your hand is still slightly expanded to accommodate the interval of a sixth between the bottom and top notes. So the warm-up for these is the root position chord, then move the bottom note up to the top and grab what was the middle note or the B with your pinky. Then move the new bottom note to the top and put finger 2 on the new middle note. Then move the bottom note up to the top once more, and you should be back into the root position G chord, but now you're an octave above where you started. Then we work our way back down. I'll show you how the warm-up exercise should go in the left hand. You may have noticed that I held each chord for 3 beats and moved on beat 4 of each measure so that I landed on time for beat 1, even though each chord was notated in whole notes. This is common practice, so remember it's usually okay to release a note a little early in order to change hand position and arrive on time. You might also notice how I'm changing the shape of my hand to match the upcoming chord in the air as I shift or travel to the new chord. This comes with practice, but I'm pointing it out so that you can be aware of it and work toward this goal as you learn to play these triads and inversions. I'll play it for you once more so that you can notice both when and how I move my hand. Okay, why don't you try it with me? We'll go a little slower because it is not as easy as it looks. 1, 2, here we go. 1, 2, 3, move. 2, 3, move. 2, 3, move. G, back, down. Now, 2, 3, move, 2, 3, move. For the right hand, the fingering is a little different from the left for the first and second inversion chords. You'll play the root position chord with 1, 3, 5. Remember to think about and number the chords and fingering from bottom to top. Then, for first inversion, you'll play 1, 2, 5, remembering to expand your hand slightly to accommodate the sixth between the outer pitches and the interval of a third between the bottom and middle notes. Finally, we shift to the second inversion chord using fingers 1, 3, 5 again. Although this may seem a little awkward right now, once you get used to it, this will be the most comfortable fingering. I can't stress enough how important it is to be consistent with your fingering for these chords. Correct fingering really will improve your performance accuracy in the long run. How about if you watch me play the right hand triad and inversion warm-up before you play it? Okay, it's your turn to try. Here we go, just a little slower. 1, 2, and play. 2, 3, move. 2, 3, move. Move once more. Now come down. 2, 3, 4. 2, 3, 4. You will need to work on these on your own, at your own pace. I'll suggest a goal tempo to reach for next time, but initially I would advise playing slowly and fairly strongly so that your fingers learn where each of these chords and inversions are. I'll show you the triads and inversions for C major in the left hand next. It will look similar, but I'll only be playing C's and E's and G's in various combinations. I would recommend watching me now, then you can practice on your own. Here's the left hand. The last one of these I'd like to look at today is A major. Remember, A, C sharp, E. So you'll need to plan for the C sharp in each inversion. Here's how the right hand will look. In terms of the pattern of white and black keys on the piano, D major will look and feel similar to A major, so I would recommend practicing those two during the same practice session. You'll find the notation for D major in your music book. For next time, I'll have you focus on the chords and inversions of these four keys, C, G, D, and A major. We'll add others at subsequent lessons. Since we're focusing on chords and inversions in this lesson, I'd like to add one more warm-up into the mix. I'd like you to start playing arpeggios. An arpeggio in music is just a fancy name for a broken chord. When you play more advanced piano works by Brahms and many other composers, you'll need to avail yourself of arpeggios that sweep across the keyboard. For now, we'll learn the most basic arpeggio, which will have you crossing your left hand over the right, so it will look quite impressive as you play these, especially since we aren't even halfway through our lessons yet. Since an arpeggio is a broken chord, we've really already started playing them. Let's try this in C major. Here's how our arpeggio will look. You'll notice that I simply played the broken chord in the left hand, and then the right hand, and as I was playing the right hand, I crossed my left over so that it would be ready to play the tonic note, or C, at the top. Then I descended back down to the starting note. I'll do it again. I'll have you work on that arpeggio on your own before our next lesson. So we didn't learn a lot of new piano music today, but we have begun to set the technical foundation upon which so much piano music is based. If you can master these first 4 triads and inversions with the correct fingering and learn to recognize how they look on the staff, you'll be in good shape for future reading of new music, which we call sight reading, and for being able to quickly learn repertoire that makes extensive use of chords. Next time, we'll learn even more chords and inversions, dive more deeply into the dominant chord, and learn some new repertoire. In order to follow along with me next time, be sure to practice the following: your C, G, D, and A major triad and inversions. Do these with separate hands with the correct fingering at a quarter note equals 60. The C major arpeggio. Work on the Kohler melody. Remember to transpose it to D major. Also work on the 12-bar blues. Work on the right hand first, and then try it with the left hand a couple of times. Memorize the key signatures for C, G, D, and F major, and review any other repertoire from previous lessons. Also transpose previously learned repertoire into some new keys for an added challenge. See you next time. Happy practicing.